Okay, sir. Okay. Hello. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Department of Biomedical Engineering, PSNA College of Engineering and Technology, Dindigul, I welcome all of you for this webinar on ventilator design perspectives. Today, we have with us Mr. K. Venkatraman, Managing Partner, Technical, BioVision Medical Systems, Chennai, for handling this session. I sincerely hope that everybody will have a good learning experience today. With these few words, I hand over the session to Mr. Venkatraman. Sir, over to you now, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good morning to everyone present here. I'm K. Venkatraman, Managing Partner of BioVision Medical Systems. So today's session will be a basic insight about design perspectives of ventilators, where we will be covering with a basic understanding on what is a ventilator, natural ventilation, and what are the perspectives that should be taken care when we are planning to design a ventilator. Yeah. So to start with, to understand what is ventilation based on the terminology, ventilation basically refers to air circulation of air in and outside any object is referred to as ventilation. In is well ventilated, that means the air circulation within the room is so good, that means it is well ventilated. So same way, when our body is said to be ventilated, that means there is a very good flow of air within and outside of our body. So basically, for understanding, ventilation refers to inflow and outflow, that is circulation of air. காற்று சுழற்சி அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம் தமிழ்ல. So ventilation refers to air circulation. So where does this air circulate in our body, or how does it actually happen in our body? So getting into a basic understanding of anatomy and physiology about natural mechanism of ventilation, we will have to understand why the inflation and deflation of this lungs occurs. So there are two basic muscles which are taking care of this action of inhalation and exhalation. The two muscles are namely diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. So as the diaphragm moves down and the intercostal muscles are expanded, the lungs gets expanded and the air tends to flow in. So for basic understanding the physiology behind ventilation, the air flows in because of the negative pressure which is being created inside the lungs. So how is this negative pressure being created? Due to the movement of diaphragm and intercostal muscles. Fine. So once the negative pressure is created, the air starts flowing inside. Now the lung is full of air. So what happens at this point of time is the diaphragm and the intercostal muscle will start to shrink the lung. So what happens automatically is an excess pressure is being created inside the lungs. So when the excess pressure is created inside the lungs, so automatically the air tends to flow from higher pressure to lower pressure. So it automatically exhales from inside of the lung to outside of the body, that is to the atmosphere. So basically the air circulation is due to the difference in pressure, the negative pressure which is being created inside the lungs due to the movement of two major muscles, namely the diaphragm and the intercostal muscle. So now the air is getting inside. After that, what exactly happens? So ventilation is not just inflow and outflow, it also includes something called as respiration. When I say it is respiration, respiration is until the gas exchange occurs between your blood and the alveoli. As you all know, alveoli is a sac-like structure into which the air diffuses through the blood capillaries and it is then carried out to the entire part of the body. So this alveoli is basically responsible for the gas exchange mechanism. So it is a semipermeable membrane basically. So what problem occurs here usually is most of the times your lung gets stiffened, which means the respiratory tract from the upper part, your windpipe, your bronchioles up to your alveoli, everything develops a higher resistance. If such is the case, a natural ventilation becomes very hard. The patient cannot ventilate very normally. So in such cases, we do this artificially. We take up this responsibility of ventilation artificially. So to start with, a ventilator can be understood as a machine which is used to push and take out the air into and out of your lungs, right? So whenever there is a insufficient breathing or absence of breathing, which we call as apnea, absence of breathing due to intercostal muscle damage or intercostal rib cage damage or a diaphragm damage, phrenic nerve damage, there may be many reasons for a patient who is not respiring or partially respiring. So in these physiological conditions, to support the exact mechanism of respiration for the patient, we go with a device called as ventilator. So where in a hospital is this ventilator most commonly used? There are various wide applications of a ventilator. So as you understand, ventilator is not only used in an ICU, it is also used in ambulance for shifting a patient in between hospitals or whatever, and also in an operation theater where the patient is partially sedated. Few times the patient will be partially sedated, so the patient cannot breathe by themselves because their nervous system is being sedated. So in such cases you need something called as anesthesia ventilator. So now in today's session we will be having a briefing about ICU ventilator, which will be having all the modes and all the advantages of a transport ventilator, an anesthesia ventilator, and also a ICU ventilator. So as I said earlier, why do we use a ventilator? Generally, whenever there is a lack of oxygen for the patient, there is no proper breathing for the patient. The patient is not able to complete his breath cycle. He is not able to inspire and expire properly. He is not able to inhale and exhale properly. In such cases, we go for a ventilator. There are some few disorders called as COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, or ARDS, that is acute respiratory distress. So for these kind of respiratory problems, we may need ventilators because your natural respiratory tract may not be efficient enough for air circulation and air exchange. Apart from this, to rest the respiratory muscles, to decrease the work of breathing. For example, in most of the cardiac cases, whenever they do some cardiac cases, they'll be using a ventilator post operative. Why? Because they need to give some rest for your cardiac system and your lung system, because your thorax basically, because when you undergo a cardiothoracic surgery, your thorax needs some rest. So in such cases, to decrease the work of breathing, you use a ventilator to avoid any respiratory complications and sleep quality. Maybe in upcoming slides we will see how a ventilator will be used to improve our sleep quality. So among all these, the first point is the key point, wherein it is actually used to improve your oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, which means most of the times we understand a ventilator is a device used to push the oxygen. No, that is not the only function of the ventilator. The other major function of the ventilator is to flush out the carbon dioxide that is already present in the lungs. So supposing the ventilator is not flushing out carbon dioxide so efficiently, still just only pumping oxygen inside, in such cases a ventilator is not going to succeed, because higher levels of carbon dioxide will make the patient to stay unconscious. They cannot recover very easily. Okay. So the basic idea of using a ventilator is to push oxygen inside and flush out carbon dioxide outside the lungs. Now I'm saying that I'm going to push the air, suck the air. Okay, fine. But how will I do that? It is not a mere balloon to just blow the air and suck the air. So I need some pathway or some other tool, methodology, through which I can actually deliver this air and I can suck out the air. So for that, I have two major techniques, namely one is invasive technique and one is non-invasive technique. So when I say it is non-invasive, it is used for a very short duration of time, maybe few hours, or sometimes few days also, based on the mode. So if such cases, I will be using a simple mask to deliver the air, and that mask will be connected to the machine. When I say it is invasive, there is something called as intubation. Intubation means putting the tube into position. What tube will you put into position? There is something called as endotracheal tube, that is ET tube. This ET tube is inserted through the mouth into your trachea. That's why it is called as endotracheal tube. So you put this tube into your trachea. How do you put this? How do you locate your trachea? By means of a laryngoscope. So you put a laryngoscope, open your mouth. The anesthetist will be doing this intubation procedure, or intensivist will be doing it usually. So using a laryngoscope, you open your mouth, You put the tube inside your mouth, and then there's you can see here in the ET tube picture, there is something blown, a balloon kind of structure is blown there, which we'll be seeing in the next slide again. So intubation basically refers to putting of a tube into your mouth, that is intubation. And if not, you can also, supposing the patient is going to be under ventilator for weeks together, more than a week's time, then what we will be doing is we will be cutting the trachea directly, and we will be putting the tube into the trachea itself. This is called as tracheostomy. Tomy refers to incision. A incision in trachea is refers to as tracheostomy. So these are the ET tubes which are commonly used for a ventilator. Here you can see a blue color structure. So that is called as a cuffed ET tube. So in this slide, if you could see the balloon-like structure, no, that is called as the cuff. So what is the use of this is, once the air is blown through the ET tube, inside the ET tube, there are few possibilities that the air will come out through the side spaces. Just imagine this balloon is deflated. Just imagine in the tracheostomy picture, the balloon is deflated. So what happens when the air is flowing into the tracheostomy tube, there are chances that the air will come out through the upper tract of trachea. So to avoid this backflow of air, we will be inflating this balloon. So this is most commonly used for adult patients. So this is called as cuffed ET tube. For neonatal or newborns, the tracheal size will be very less, so you cannot use a cuffed ET tube there. So you go with something called as non-cuffed ET tube, right? Before the invention of these ventilators, or suppose a ventilator fails, what are we going to do? How does it occur manually? So any automation or any machine based system will always have a manual alternative. Similarly, for ventilation, we have a manual alternative which is called as ambu bag, we call. So these blue color structures are called as ambu bags, which are used to ventilate the patient for a very short duration of time. Maybe if you had gone through various news channels recent times, maybe past or for past 1 month actually, you can see many people developing few devices which are used to press these ambu bags. So instead of pressing this manually, we are pressing it using a pump. An external pump is just pressing this ambu bag. But anyways, that cannot be a complete ventilator, which we'll be discussing in future slides. Okay, so for a manual ventilation, we connect oxygen here at the back end of this blue color tube, and we simply pump, and that air will be pushed into the patient's airway system. So coming to the basic mechanism or technology behind ventilation. How does this ventilation really occur? There are two basic methodologies. One is called as negative pressure ventilation. One is called as positive pressure ventilation. When I say it is negative pressure ventilation, what happens is, instead of pushing the air into my lungs, what I will do is I will make the air enter into my lungs by itself. But how could I do that? The patient thoracic region will be totally covered with the airtight chamber. And what I will do is I will try to imagine what I'm saying. So here I will try to expand the thoracic region, the outer layer of thorax, the chest will be literally expanded. The chest will be expanded, and thereby it creates a negative pressure in your lung. Please see if you can visualize this. This piston will move up, which means this chamber will actually pull your thorax. As the thorax is pulled, what happens? Your lung will also be pulled. So volume is higher inside the lung, so negative pressure is created there. Automatically what happens is the air from the atmosphere will rush into the lung, thereby finishing off the process of ventilation. This is called as negative pressure ventilation, which was used in earlier 1920s and 30s. So after that, there are many disadvantages here. It cannot be used continuously. The patient will be very restless, will be very painful. So because of this, they emerged with something called as positive pressure ventilation. So instead of creating a negative pressure in the lung, which will allow the air to flow directly, what they are doing here is they themselves they are blowing the air into your lungs with some pressure. Understood? So this is called as positive pressure ventilation. So this is the basic difference between negative pressure ventilation and positive pressure ventilation. In negative pressure ventilation, the patient thorax is totally covered with an airtight chamber, and the negative pressure is created by pulling the thoracic region, because of which there is a negative pressure in your lung. Automatically the air rushes inside to compensate this negative pressure. In a positive pressure ventilation, you simply push the air directly into your lung itself through your airway, through your windpipe. So coming to the parameters of ventilation, there are three basic parameters of ventilation, but most of us understand only two parameters, namely pressure and volume. Just imagine when you are going to blow a balloon, you blow a balloon. How far is the balloon blown? When you start blowing, you will stop at some time, right? So when will you stop it? Whenever you feel the balloon's pressure is high, the balloon may burst out beyond this pressure. It cannot tolerate beyond this pressure. At that point of time, you will stop your inflation. So similarly, when I am ventilating my lungs, I can stop the ventilation at some point of time. That is defined by means of volume or pressure. I either push the air of certain volume. For example, I either push 500 ml of air into my lungs, or I push the air into my lungs until it reaches a pressure of 20. You get my point? There are two basic ways by which we can blow the air into a balloon. Blow 500 ml of air into the balloon. Step 1. So this is called as volume control, where volume is the basic parameter. 500 ml of air should enter into my lung. Fine. Or I can also say that blow the air until the balloon reaches a pressure of 20. So here pressure is a parameter. So it is called as pressure control. So when I say volume and pressure, both of this is achieved only by means of something called as flow. What do you mean by flow? Some volume of air per unit time, say some liters per minute. So there should be some flow of air which should be always present. So this flow directly relates volume, but the flow is also indirectly related to pressure. As flow increases, the pressure will also increase. So the two basic parameters to be remembered always are volume and pressure. Understood? So this is what we were discussing here. So when I say it is control ventilation, there is something called as control ventilation, wherein the machine, the ventilator, will take the entire control of the patient. The breath pattern of the patient, the ventilation pattern of the patient is totally taken care by the machine itself. This is called as control mode of ventilation. In that only I can mention whether the lung has to tolerate this volume of air or this much of pressure. So when I define it with pressure, it is called as pressure control ventilation. When I define it with volume, it is called as volume control ventilation. So in the slide, you can see there is something called as resistive lung and compliant lung, which we will be seeing in the future slides. So basically, this pressure control ventilation is used whenever we use a non-cuffed ET tube. We were discussing about the non-cuffed ET tube, right? Especially for newborns. So whenever we use these kind of non-cuffed ET tubes, we will be using pressure control ventilation, right? So coming to other parameters, apart from this volume, apart from this pressure, what are the other parameters that are used to be set in a ventilator? So before that, I would like to tell a point here. There is something called as tidal volume and peak inspiratory pressure. Okay. So when I say this much volume should go, that is a normal volume of air that is entering and coming out of your lung during your normal respiration. We normally breathe, right? During our breathing pattern, normal breathing pattern, some volume of air will enter into our lung and the same volume of air will come out of the lung. This volume of air is called as tidal volume. It is usually calculated as body weight into 10 ml. Okay. So if I am a 50 kg person, then my tidal volume or my lung volume will be 500 ml. For every breath, I will be taking 500 ml of oxygen. I mean, mixture of air, and I will be delivering out 500 ml of mixture of air. Fine. So respiratory rate, it is also called as frequency, which means how many number of breaths is being delivered by the ventilator to the patient for per minute. So for 1 minute, how many breaths is it supposed to give? So a normal human will be respiring 12 to 14 times per minute. It can also be, it should be more than 4 minimum to survive. If it is less than 4, we cannot survive. And if I could actually highlight here, the process of breathing is a very mysterious process, which is neither voluntary nor involuntary. So when I say it is heartbeat or digestion or these kind of activities, these are all involuntary activities wherein we cannot attain or we cannot gain a control over these activities. But when I say it is breathing, I can have a partial control. I can try to control my breathing. I can stop my breathing, but only up to some point of time, after which it will automatically happen. So it is partially voluntary and partially involuntary activity. So to achieve this, we need to set some respiratory rate, that is number of breaths per minute. Fine. And there is something called as FiO2. Not every time we will be delivering only oxygen to the patient. So we have to deliver air. See, our normal atmospheric air contains 21% of oxygen. So when I am going to recover the patient from the ventilator, the patient must be able to breathe under this 21% of oxygen. Maybe initially he may be needing higher amount of oxygen. So I start with 100%, but ultimately I have to reduce this 100% and I have to achieve this 21%. So I have to set the amount of oxygen that is entering into the patient lung. So this can be set by fraction of inspired oxygen. Fraction of inspired oxygen, that is FiO2. So FiO2 refers to the percentage of oxygen that is being delivered by the ventilator to the patient. So when I say there is a breathing pattern, you can try breathing now. Inhale, exhale. So when I do that, there is some time taken for inhalation, some time taken for exhalation. Usually, exhalation takes more time than inhalation. Why is it so? Because as I said earlier, flushing out of carbon dioxide is much more important than delivery of oxygen. Both are important, of course, it's understood, it's accepted, but still CO2 flushing should be more efficient. So usually is to E ratio is 1:2. For a normal breathing pattern, it is 1:2, where for every one time of inspiration, 2 times will be your expiration. For example, a breath pattern is total of, for example, the respiratory rate is 20 breaths per minute. That means each breath will be taking 3 seconds, right? So in this 3 seconds, 1 second will be your inspiration, 2 seconds will be your expiration. So this is the basic idea of I is to E ratio. When I keep it as 2:1, then it is called as inverse ratio ventilation. These are all used for poisonous cases kind of thing. Suppose you are designing a ventilator, you must design a ventilator with IE ratio within a range of 2:1, 1:1, 1:2, and 1:3. All these four ranges are mandatory for a ICU ventilator. Coming to something called as pressure limit. See, when I am talking about volume control ventilation, I will be setting only the amount of air that is entering. For example, 500 ml of air enter into the lung. Suppose my lung is very stiff, or my lung is not able to accommodate that much of volume. What happens is, you take a very small balloon, and you try to blow more amount of air. What happens? The balloon will burst off. Similarly, your lung will also burst off. Suppose you blow more air than the capacity of your lung will literally undergo a damage, which is called as barotrauma. Trauma, damage, shock, damage, baro due to pressure. So a shock in lung due to overpressure is referred to as barotrauma. To avoid this barotrauma, you keep something as pressure limit, so that whenever the ventilator tries to push the air beyond this pressure, it will not ventilate, it will stop. So you have to keep this parameter so that the patient lung will not burst off. You can avoid the damage to the patient's lungs. And there is another parameter called as PEEP, positive end expiratory pressure. As the name suggests, positive end expiratory pressure. Whenever we are expiring, exhaling, the air comes out of the lung. Even after you forcefully expire, all the air will not come off. Why is it so? So whenever a balloon is deflated, If all the air from the balloon comes off, what happens? The walls of the balloon gets attached to each other. It comes in contact with each other and the lungs will get collapsed. To avoid this collapse, some volume of air will always be retained in your lung, which is called as residual volume. Due to the presence of this residual volume, some pressure is being maintained in your lungs, and this pressure is called as positive end expiratory pressure. At the end of expiration, end expiratory, you have some positive pressure in your lung. So PEEP refers to positive end expiratory pressure. So we were discussing something called as resistance and compliance in previous slides. Resistance and compliance. So what does resistance mean generally? There many electronics people will be there. So resistance refers to opposition, not necessarily to flow of current, to flow of anything for that matters. So here the resistance refers to flow of air. It is the opposition offered to the flow of air. If your lung is very stiff or this is very narrow, your windpipe is very narrow, in that cases you will be having a high resistance. So higher pressure will be developed in such cases. We were talking about few abnormalities like COPD, ARDS. So these abnormalities will be developing high resistance in your lung. So whenever the lung is of higher resistance, you always go with pressure control ventilation. Compliance is something like inverse of resistance. So when it is more elastic, even for a very small volume of air, it can accommodate more volume. For example, whenever, see, you from this graph you can understand, if it is a high compliant lung, the red color curve, high compliant lung, that means even for very high lung volume, the lung volume is very high, but still the pressure is very less. So it can accommodate more volume of air, after which it will be starting to develop pressure. So barotrauma is very impossible in case of a high compliant lung. So when I say it is low compliance, it is high resistance, the blue color curve. Even for a lesser volume of air, the pressure is very high. So barotrauma is very, very susceptible for high resistive lung. So a normal lung lies somewhere in between. So when you are developing a ventilator, you have to take care that it must be able to accommodate any kind of lungs, both compliant, high resistive and normal lungs. Any lungs should be accommodated by your ventilator. So coming to the heart of ventilator, so there is something called as modes of ventilation. So whenever I'm trying to develop a device which is going to support my natural mechanism, I should always ensure that this machine is not a substitute. It is not going to remain as a substitute till the life ends. It should be a supportive device only for a shorter duration. It has to always boost up your natural mechanism. It should always enhance your natural mechanism. Not only this, for that matters, any device you develop, it should always boost up the natural mechanism. Similarly, when I'm going to develop an artificial ventilator, an external ventilator, the role of my ventilator should be such that it has to boost up the natural ventilation so that the patient will gradually come out of the ventilator and will start to undergo a natural ventilation by themselves, right? So initially the patient is not able to ventilate at all. There is a major damage with the patient, or the patient is completely sedated, something like that. In that case, you go for something called as control mode of ventilation, which we were discussing. The entire breath pattern of the patient, entire breath pattern, overall breathing, everything will be taken care only by the machine, irrespective of the patient response. The patient may try to breathe. No, I am least bothered. Only the machine will be delivering the breaths. So whatever happens to the patient, irrespective of that, the machine will keep on deliver the breaths to the patient. So this is used for very, very, very high risk patients, or who are not able to breathe at all, totally not able to breathe. For them, we use control mode of ventilation. Now, suppose for some reason the patient is starting to breathe, is trying to breathe. So in control mode of ventilation, what happens? It will totally ignore the patient's breath, right? So when the patient is trying to breathe, instead of supporting the patient's breath, it will try to suppress the patient breath. So this phenomenon cannot be advisable. So here we have to take care that the patient's natural mechanism should be encouraged and not suppressed. So for that matter, we have another mode of ventilation called as SIMV, synchronous intermittent mandatory mode of ventilation. So to survive, we don't have to ventilate 12 times a minute. 4 times a minute is sufficient. But here in mandatory ventilation, I keep this 4 or 6 or 8 breaths as a mandatory ventilation. It will be delivered to the patient for sure. The patient may breathe or may not breathe or whatever be it. This will be delivered to the patient for sure. Assured. This is mandatory ventilation. In between these mandatory ventilations, in between these 4 or 6 ventilations, the patient can also take his own breathing. Okay, so this is called as synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation. Intermittent to the mandatory ventilations, in a synchronized way, the patient can also take his own breathing. So here what you do is, you are actually trying to encourage the patient to start his breathing mechanism instead of suppressing. So you are avoiding a man-machine fight here. In control mode, you have a man-machine fight. The man will say that, no, I will start my breathing mechanism, I will be breathing. Machine will say that, no, it's my duty to push the air, no, I will only be pushing the air, so you're not supposed to breathe. This man machine fight is overcome here in SIMV mode of ventilation, where you have something called as mandatory ventilation to ensure the patient will not die due to apnea, due to lack of respiration. So this in between these mandatory ventilations, the patient can also take his own breaths. So once the patient is under SIMV mode of ventilation, he is under observation, keen observation. Suppose he is able to take more number of breaths, he is able to initiate more number of breaths. Very well and good. That means the patient is responding well. It's some time that the patient has to come out of the ventilator, the patient from SIMV mode to spontaneous mode of ventilation. So here I have to tell you something about sensitivity trigger. That means I am saying that the patient is able to take the breath, so the machine will have to support the breath. The patient takes the breath, initiates the breath, the machine has to support the breath. How do you know that patient is taking a breath? So you need some parameter through which you have to identify that the patient is taking the breath or not. That parameter is called as trigger sensitivity. Whenever the patient tries to take a breath, there is a negative pressure being created, right? So my ventilator is having a constant flow of air. So when the patient is trying to take his own breath, what happens? There is a drop in pressure. This drop in pressure will sense that the patient is taking the breath. Yeah, the patient has initiated the breath. Very good. Suppose he is not able to complete the breath, it will support him to complete the breath. Understood? So the same happens in spontaneous mode of ventilation. You will be having a constant flow of air. That is a continuous positive air will be flowing in the airway. The patient will be initiating the breath. So there is a drop in this pressure. Immediately the machine will sense, yeah, he has taken a breath, support him. Very well and good. This will be happening throughout. So here in CPAP mode, continuous positive airway pressure mode, there is no mandatory ventilations. The patient has to take his own ventilations. It is very risky, right? Because suppose if the patient is not taking any ventilation or not taking any breath, what happens? The patient has to die. Mandatory at least 4 breaths he has to take per minute. Suppose he is not taking that breath per minute, for some reason he has failed to initiate the breath, the patient will die. It is called as apnea. So in such cases, the machine should have something called as backup ventilation. Whenever there is an apnea that is being declared, whenever there is a lack of breathing, absence of breathing, the machine has to take back into a normal ventilation, control mode of ventilation, which is called as a backup ventilation. Suppose the patient is initiating breath again, then it has to come back to CPAP mode of ventilation. Apnea, go to BUV, backup ventilation. Patient starts breathing, come back to CPAP mode. Clear? So when you are designing a ventilator, ensure that you have backup ventilation. If 20 seconds there is no breath, then it has to declare apnea alarm and it has to undergo backup ventilation. Okay. There are a few other things like inspiratory and expiratory hold, usually used to take X-ray and all. You hold the breath in inspiration or expiration condition that can be there in the machine. Psi refers to a long breath. Perumuchun solluvom Tamil. A long breath. And trigger sensitivity I had already explained for the supportive mode of ventilation, right? So here I have just given a gist of, or I have actually re-explained what was there. So in control mode or assist control mode, the machine will be taking care of the patient's breath. So whenever the patient is sedated or totally not able to breathe, in such cases we go for assist control mode of ventilation. Suppose the patient is trying to ventilate, the patient is initiating the breath, then you go for SIMB mode of ventilation, wherein the ventilator will ensure some numbers of mandatory ventilation so that the patient will not die due to lack of ventilation. And also the patient will be encouraged to take his own breaths in between these mandatory ventilations, that is called as SIMB mode of ventilation. Then there is something called as CPAP mode of ventilation, wherein it's a normal flow, continuous positive flow will be always there. The patient may trigger, the patient may take the flow and initiate the breath. In the initial slides, in the use of ventilator, we were talking something about improving the sleep quality. So this mode of CPAP is used to improve your sleep quality. How does it improve your sleep quality? Most of the times, the people who snore, who snore will have something called as sleep apnea. They start snoring, the sound of snoring will gradually increase. At some point of time, what happens? It will increase gradually, and with a panic, they will just wake up. All of a sudden, immediately they will wake up. So why does this occur? Due to absence of breathing. There is lack of air that is entering into your trach. Why does the sound come? Whenever there is a constriction in your airway path, whenever the flow of air is restricted, you get a sound, right? Similarly, whenever your windpipe is being restricted, then you get the sound of snoring. To avoid this restriction, you will be having a continuous flow of air. This is also called as a CPAP. You have a separate device called as a CPAP device itself. Alarm is very, very important for any machine because it is going to indicate the present status of the patient as well as the machine. So whenever there is a obstruction or whenever there is a disconnection, it is very mandatory to give alarms. So why does this obstruction come? I had put an ET tube, I have intubated the patient, ET tube is put, ventilation has started. The patient is being ventilated. All of a sudden, I get a high pressure limit alarm, high pressure alarm. Why does it happen? Either the tube would have been misplaced, any kink or any folding in the tube may cause a high pressure. But it's very commonly, there will be some secretions from the patient. The patient will secrete from his mouth. So that secretions will be settled in the tube, and this will cause a block, not allowing the air to enter into your windpipe. Understood? So in this cases, you get high pressure alarm. So immediately you have to put a suction, evacuate the secretions, and then you can start. So low pressure or low exhaled volume is very common when there is a disconnection. So whenever the patient is disconnected or there is a leak in the tubing, patient circuit, there is a leak there through the tubing which you deliver the air. So in such cases, you get low pressure or low exhale volume, basically. High respiratory rate, if the patient is over triggering, you set the trigger, the patient is taking very shallow breaths, many number of shallow breaths, then you get high respiratory rate. If such is the case, you have to alter the sensitivity parameter. So I have started with control mode of ventilation, came to SIMV, then at CPAP. So I have to come out of ventilator, right? This process is called as weaning. Weaning refers to coming out of the ventilator. So once after taking out the ventilator, I'll be connecting a low flow oxygen. You would have seen in hospitals, you have a humidifier jar with a low flow oxygen. The oxygen may be connected through a mask or something called as TPs, with which the patient will be under observation for a day at least, and then only the patient will be discharged. Suppose there is any other problem during this extubation. Extubation refers to removing of ET tube. So once the patient is extubated and connected to oxygen, there are some problems. Then we have to re-intubate the patient. So for which we will be having a constant assessment and monitoring of this extubated patient. So in order to enhance the quality of their respiration, enhance the complete cycle of respiration, we also give them some respiratory exercises through physiotherapists. Like you will be having 3 balls with which you have to blow like that. Some respiratory exercises will be given to them. And humidified oxygen may be given if necessary. If the saturation is not picking up properly, then you may need humidified oxygen. Coming to design's perspective of a ventilator, what are the parts of a ventilator? The main part of a ventilator is a blender. Blender is a mixer. So when I say air contains 21% of oxygen, simply blowing the air into my lungs may not help me at times because I may be in need of more oxygen. Diffusion will be less, so I may need more oxygen. So in such cases, you have to give only oxygen, 100% of oxygen. But giving 100% of oxygen more than 8 hours will make you die. Too much of anything will not be good for you, right? So over oxygen for longer duration, 100% of oxygen for more than 8 hours is going to cause hyperoxemia and you will be dying because of that. So we have to mix this oxygen with air, right? So supposing you are going to deliver 60% of oxygen, then 60% of oxygen should be mixed with air. For this case, you need a mixer, which is called as a blender, where you give input oxygen and air, both are combined and then delivered to the pneumatic system. What do you mean by pneumatic system? It is some system which is combined of valves and solenoids, where the air flows. Airflow path is referred to as a pneumatic system basically. A pressure regulator to ensure with which pressure the air is being delivered, a pressure sensor to constantly monitor the airway pressure, a flow sensor to measure the amount of air that is being entering. So when I say we will be discussing in detail about the sensor technologies again, a piston or turbine to generate air with a high pressure. So a normal oxygen we have high pressure through cylinder, but air cylinders are not available. So for that we will be using a compressor, a centerline compressor or a turbine motor to pressurize air. Filters and tubings are all common parts of a ventilator. So now coming to sensors part of thing. So what we have is three basic sensors are required in a ventilator. One is your flow sensor, one is a pressure sensor, another one is your oxygen sensor. So here we will be discussing some basic technology of sensing which is already present in few ventilators. Maybe based on that you may be having your own idea to design a ventilator also. So most commonly flow is indirectly measured, not a direct parameter, whereas pressure is measured as a direct parameter. So first methodology here displayed here is hot wire anemometry. Hot wire anemometry, where you have a hot wire. Most of us will drink tea or coffee or milk or whatever. So when it is hot, what will we do? We'll just blow into it, right? So when you blow, the temperature will decrease. So similarly, here I am having a hot wire. When I'm trying to blow the air or oxygen into this, the hot wire, what happens? The temperature of the hot wire will come down. So the rate at which the temperature is dropping is directly proportional to the flow of air. Simple. Right? So you have a thermistor to sense the temperature of this hot wire anemometer. So as the air is blown, temperature drops. So when I use a thermistor, as temperature drops, the resistance drops. This resistance could be determined by using a Wheatstone network, balance the Wheatstone network, identify the value of resistance, calculate the amount of flow. So for a basic understanding, we can just understand that a hot wire is being maintained into which air is blown. As the air is blown, the temperature is dropped. So as temperature drops, the resistance is varied. This is used to calculate the rate of flow. Understood? So here is another methodology where it is indirectly measured using a pressure sensor. If you can actually see here, there is a measuring channel in which you will be having a flag. As the air flows through the measuring channel, the air is flowing through the measuring channel, the flag will move off backside. When the flag is moving on backside, you can see the bottom of the flag is connected to a strain gauge. So this flag movement is going to press my strain gauge. The strain gauge is very sensitive, and hence this movement of flag over the strain gauge is going to create a variation in pressure or resistance again. So as the flow increases, the strain sensed by the strain gauge will also increase. So the flow is directly proportional to the strain or pressure which is being created on the strain gauge. So with which we can estimate the amount of air that has been blown through the sensor. So here it is something called as differential pressure technique, which we will be aware of basically. So you have an orifice and you create a pressure difference. So and this pressure difference is based on the rate of flow. So as the flow is high, you can see the pressure difference will also be greater. So if the flow is less, then the pressure difference will also be less. So this pressure difference is being measured, and it is very commonly used flow sensor. It is an external flow sensor which will be used near the patient, very commonly used nowadays because of its easy availability and low cost. So it is a differential pressure based flow sensing technology. So these are the three basic technologies of flow sensing, one being hot wire anemometry, indirect measurement using strain gauge, and the third one is using differential pressure technique. So coming to pressure sensing technology, most of the ventilators will be using a basic technology with a strain gauge only. So you use a strain gauge, you take a pressure sample line from the airway, you take a pressure sample line, give it to the strain gauge, it will sense the pressure and that will be monitored constantly in a real time, instantaneous manner. For oxygen, we commonly use chemical sensor, which will be replaced usually every year. It has a very small lifetime. So it is a chemical sensor like an electro photovoltaic cell basically. So as the oxygen interacts into this, there is a resistance or a very small millivolt being developed across the terminologies of this metal that is being used to sense the level of FiO2. These are all just sensing methodologies which can be used to control the delivery. Okay, this has nothing to play with what is being delivered from the ventilator, but to monitor what is being delivered from the ventilator, we need all these sensing methodologies. So here is something called as loop and waveform, which an anesthetist will be seeing to understand the lung mechanism. If there is any problem with the lung, if the patient lung is very bad, that could be very well understood from these loops and waveforms, right? So coming to the evolution, how did the ventilator start? Which year did the ventilator start? As I said, there was a negative pressure ventilation initially. Within a big tank, the patient will be placed. You can see in this picture, iron lung picture. The patient will be placed and there a negative pressure will be created in the thorax region, due to which the air will be made to flow into your lungs. That was the first iron lung methodology of negative pressure ventilation. After which came a totally pneumatic ventilator. You connect the gas, ventilation will start. You don't need any electronic parts here. It will be having solenoids which are all gas driven. So once you start connecting the external gas supply, the machine will start to function. Then came the first servo ventilator. What is a servo ventilator? A servo control motor. A servo refers to that we have some feedback from the output. So when I say we have some flow sensor, pressure sensor and all, if the flow is not proper or the volume is not proper, I have to adjust my delivery and make the volume be proper, right? So this is called as servo ventilation. This servo ventilation technology was invented in 1970s through a ventilator called a Siemens Servo 900, SV900 ventilator. And initial times it was either pediatric adult ventilator. Most of the cases there was very less ventilators for neonates, and no ventilator was a common ventilator for all range of patients. Then Siemens came out with SV300 model, which is all patient ventilator, can be used for neonate, pediatric, adult, any range of patient it could be used. So Siemens came with SV300 ventilator, and now it is Mackay. And the ventilators were all bulky, so they emerged with the Pulmonetics was the company, Carefusion, which came with a compact ventilator called as a laptop ventilator. It will be literally like a laptop. The size of the LTV ventilator is just like a laptop. It's very mobile, easily carryable anywhere. And then came a modular ventilator. Modular ventilator is also a all patient ventilator with all modes in within. You have NIV. NIV is non-invasive ventilation using mask, or invasive ventilation using ED tube. Anything could be put by this ventilator, that is Servo I in 2001. Now you have something called a Servo S from Mackay. That is the current ventilator. And coming to the advancements, nowadays people have also come out with something called as pocket ventilators. So it has been evaluated in AIIMS also, I suppose, but I am not for these kind of ventilators, because a ventilator should always be understood as a ventilator only. Recently, you would have undergone this. Mahindra company has also given some ventilator pumping kind of thing. As I said during my startup of my speech, these devices cannot be compatible with a ventilator, or not to be compared with a ventilator at all, because a ventilator is complete only if it has all these three basic modes at least, only if it has all these sensing methodologies at least. If these are all not there, so why did we come with a ventilator when we have a simple device called as ambu bag, manual ventilation? It's a matter of 4,000 3,000 rupees. You can just buy it and you can keep on pressing it. In spite of which we came with a ventilator which is going to cost you around 10 lakhs. Why is it so? Because when you're putting an ambu bag, it is very temporary. You don't know what is the volume of air that is going in. You cannot understand the lung parameter. Here you have loops, waveforms, and all with which you can see the lung pattern. But there, nothing is seen, nothing is measured, nothing is sensed. You don't know what is getting inside. You don't know what exactly happens inside. Similarly, these pocket ventilators are just blowers or kind of thing, which will blow the air and is taking out. And most of the time, these are all developed with some Android based applications. And when we practically evaluate it, the problem is that it is getting stuck up, it is getting hung up. So this should not be happening, right? So when we are developing a ventilator, you see to that it should be very dynamic. The response should be very dynamic. It should immediately respond to every breath, immediately responds to every trigger of the patient. So for these matters, it need not be very small. It need not necessarily be very small, but ensure that everything of a ventilator, every mode of a ventilation or every parameter of ventilation are all satisfied by your ventilator which you are trying to design. And whenever I design a ventilator, I have to validate my ventilator with something called as master analyzer device, wherein I connect this master and I have to check all the parameters that is being ventilated, like tidal volume, PEEP, PIP, frequency, IE ratio, FiO2, all these parameters has to be evaluated. And coming to the design perspective, again, there are few people who have come up with uh, usage of a single ventilator for multiple patients, like up to 4 patients or up to 8 patients, which is totally not advisable. ICMR has given a recommendation saying that you're not supposed to use a ventilator like that, because there is nothing called as identical lungs. My lung may not be identical with another person's lung. My way of sensitivity or my lung sensitivity will not be same as the other person's lung sensitivity. So for this matters, we have to ensure that a single ventilator is not being put with some T connect. It's not a mere pipe, water flow through a pipe. So you cannot just put a T piece and take multiple water lines. No, not that way. It's not just an air pump. It has to be dynamic with your lung parameters. So it has to dynamically interact with your lung. So please ensure that when you're designing a ventilator, all these parameters are taken into consideration. Fine. Any doubts? I'm open.
Sir Rangatraman sir,
Yes, sir.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We got a set of 4 to 5 questions from YouTube chat.
Yes, please, sir.
Let me just go one by one.
Yes,
We
sir.
got one question from one Nivedita. She would like to know, kindly tell me, sir, how sterilization of ventilator is done in isolation ward of COVID-19, sir?
That's a very good question to ask. Basically, the sterilization thing is all dealing with the exhalation part of a ventilator. So we have a circuit through which the patient is being delivered with the air. The circuit is disposable. We will dispose this and it will be taken care by the waste management people. And coming to the exhalation filter, you have a HEPA filter kind of filter at the exhalation port, which needs to be replaced if it is used for an infectious patient, not necessarily for COVID, also for TB or any other respiratory kind of disorder, airborne disease kind of infections. You will have to replace this exhalation filter totally. This filter will avoid the entry of microbes or bacteria, germs into the ventilator. So these filter kind of thing, which will be present in any ventilator, has to be changed at the exhalation port once we use it for a infectious patient.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Maybe shall we go to the next one?
Yes, please, sir.
One Mr. Viresh Babu asked this question. Maybe it's not interpreted properly. Whether in case of brain damage, till which limit this ventilator will work? That is the question.
Till which limit, in the sense, there are patients who are under brain dead condition or coma condition for many years together under ventilator.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So there is no time limit and all. There are patients, even 3-4 years, I have seen patients who were totally bedridden under ventilator. So it's all about your heart, which has to stop.
The third question is from M. Madhumita. Okay. She asks, how long can a person stay on a ventilator?
Yeah, that's what the patient can be stayed even years together. So there is no time limit. That's why what we want is we are not supposed to make the patient get addicted to a ventilator. Our idea is that the intensivist or the anesthetist has to make the patient come out of the ventilator by changing the modes and settings, basically.
Then one from Febin J. He would like to ask, what are the main losses of ventilation?
Losses of ventilation in the sense, to be more clear, I can't get the question.
That is the total question that he has asked. What are the main losses of ventilation?
Losses of ventilation. I think the question is not so clear.
Okay, it's ambiguous. So maybe we'll go to the next question also from Viresh Babu.
Yes, sir.
Sir, if the chemoreceptor in the cells are not working properly, whether the change in pH can be controlled by ventilator?
No, the change in pH can be done using something in addition to a ventilator called as nebulizer, where we deliver the drugs basically for the respiratory system, with which you may combine some drugs to regulate the pH also through the nebulizer using a T-piece basically. So that will be decided by the intensivist or the anesthetist.
I think that those are the questions that we have for the session.
Okay.
Sir, excuse me,
sir. One more? One, sir.
Yes, Sriram, sir. We are having some questions.
Okay, sir. Go ahead then.
So one person, Deepa, asking this question, sir, is it painful to be on a ventilator?
The pain is all about tracheostomy and intubation. The inflation and deflation of lungs is not going to cause any pain. See, we have some wound or we have some surgery. The suture will be having some pain, right? Same way, that is the pain which will be suffering when we have a ventilator, I suppose, because I don't have any practical observation, but up to my assumption, I think that we will be having some pain, not based on this inflation and deflation, but related to this wound healing of tracheostomy or ET. That incomfortabilities may be there, I suppose.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
So one more question. Akash Anathurai asked this question. What is ventilator associated with associated pneumonia? How is ventilator associated pneumonia?
No, like pneumonia is also a disorder where ventilator may be used. The mode of ventilation or these kind of thing should be decided by the patient condition, how the patient is and all. So pneumonia, if the lung condition is getting worse, you have to undergo a ventilator. Not necessarily every pneumonia patient has to go with a ventilator. No, not like that. It's based on the patient condition again.
So one more question. Jayashree Espai. Sir, how will be the air be humidified in order to avoid draining of the trachea?
Good question. That's a good question which I had to be addressed before itself. You have something called as an external humidifier. In absence of humidifier for COVID kind of patients, infectious patient, you use something called as HME, heat moist exchange filter, which will be used to impart some humidity in the air you breathe, because dry air will damage your windpipe. So we need some humidity which is being imparted through a device called as humidifier or HME filter.
So one more question from
yes, sir.
Madhu. If we stay in the ventilator for a long time, anything happen to the patient?
The patient has to recover, that will happen, or the patient will get addicted. Either of this has to happen to the patient.
Nice answer, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I'm proud to be recognized this vote of thanks. I thank our management for giving permission to organize this webinar. I thank our speaker, Mr. K. Venkatraman, Managing Partner, Technical, BioVision Medical Systems, Chennai, for his wonderful session and answering the queries in a nice way. Thank you, sir. I thank you, our department faculty, for the support and encouragement in organizing this webinar. I thank you all participants for your active participation and timely response. Thank you. The feedback link was shared in here and also in the YouTube live session. So please fill the feedback. Thank you.